welcome to another episode of DisruptEDTV. Today we are joined by the dynamic duo from OMG Tech. We have Vivian, Chandra, who is the education team leader, and Maggie, Cassidy, who has been a writer on their latest project, which is something we're going to be talking about today. They've been doing a really exciting piece of work with the Ministry of Education called The Future of Learning, and it's a futures-led thinking and education piece. And this looks like some fabulous learning for our school leaders and some work being done that is designed for teachers as well as those for parents. But rather than me waffling on about it, I'd much rather you have the opportunity to hear from those that helped to create this initiative. So welcome, Vivian and Maggie.
Thank you. Sure. I guess I'll kick off and just explain the history of why we ended up doing this. So a few years ago, people at the ministry here in Auckland, so the Auckland office, took a look around and went, oh, we're kind of coming out of this in lockdown, out of lockdown, in lockdown stage of our lives. So this was 2021. And they thought, we can't lose some of the learnings that we've had over this last period about how we pivoted into online learning for schools that had never, ever thought of that kind of stuff before. And so they wanted to do a research piece looking at showcasing some of the awesome stuff that had been going on there, just so that other schools that hadn't actually quite gotten there or hadn't gotten there to the success that they wanted to had something that they could point to and look at and gone, oh, that school is very similar to ours, and we did it that way. It was meant to be restricted to just Auckland, and we mostly did that, I think. I'm just trying to remember the list of schools off the top of my head now. The research piece was so long ago. But what we ended up doing was going to a range of schools. So we really tried to get a bunch of schools that were from, different ends of the socioeconomic range. And then we also, especially for the teacher piece, we wanted to land on a few case studies. What we did was make sure that half of those were e te reo Māori and then half e te reo Pākehā in English.
Awesome.
I think maybe Maggie, if you wanted to kind of maybe explain a little bit about where we landed with the case studies, especially in the English ones that you wrote.
Yeah, sure. So this being a future-focused project, what we were looking at in the case studies was schools that have a really robust hybrid learning program. And what that means is it doesn't mean they're all doing the same thing as each other or using some kind of overarching system. It just means that learning at that school can be accessed by akonga and ideally by their whānau as well, no matter where they are, whether they're on-site or off-site, so that you can have continuous learning, even if not everyone's there every day. And I think it's really worth pointing out that the majority of these schools were not doing this as some kind of pandemic response. Most of these schools had been developing a learning
part of their DNA for quite some time.
Yeah, Tamaki College in particular, I think they've been doing this for about 12 years. And when we came to them and we were like, oh, lockdown, a few questions, they were like, we've been doing this forever. This is not some new thing that you're coming to us with now. And they actually design their own online learning platform and everything, which is a whole nother story. But yeah, the idea was to find specific examples of schools that are really just smashing it at making the learning super accessible and super flexible, and then just unpacking how they each did it, which Viv was involved with the interviews for. And then,
in terms of that, we'll work through the different three sort of strands of the project, and this being the snapshots of school practice. What were some of your biggest learnings or your biggest takeaways from these snapshots?
Yeah, so right at the beginning, we went into these interviews. I guess we'd pinpointed a few schools that we wanted to talk to. And when we went in, we were really trying not to preempt what the result was going to be, as a good researcher should do. And so we were, trying to see what they're doing. And Maggie is absolutely right. What we found was obviously the schools that had been doing it a while didn't panic when they were told to go home and had things that they could fall back on. What we found was a lot of the, best case scenarios or what's the word I'm looking for? Good examples came under three. Sorry.
Oh, best practices, I said.
Yeah, best practice is the word I'm looking for. Thank you, Maggie. Maggie is an ex-English teacher, and you can tell by how she's much more eloquent than me. So yeah, they fell under roughly 3 kind of main overarching themes. So we then ended up doing those 3 case studies along those themes rather than along school lines. So a lot of the case studies you see out there are by school. And so what we wanted to do is look at how every school was doing things under these themes. And the 3 themes that we fell on was well-being, learning architecture, and learner agency. So caring for our tauira and our akonga and the whānau, how you actually put the learning out there, what is the actual thing that you're using, the architecture, the systems that you're using, and learner agency, giving the tauira the real agency or so to be able to take the learning into their own hands.
You are speaking my love languages with those 3 things, and it's great to hear, as someone who's been passionate about this sort of stuff for a long time, it's good to know that what we've really prioritized is exactly what you're talking about. And I found informally talking to people where it so often fell over was the well-being piece and investing real structured online time to do well-being check-ins and that one-to-one mentoring, because actually they struggle to do the other stuff if the relationships aren't maintained really.
And what's really interesting about that is when we were talking to our our rioruas or our kurakopapa Māori, they had these matapono, which are like principles that they looked at in their side of the project. And what we found was theirs was slightly different, but also very similar. So the 3 themes that came out of the Te Reo Māori side was mana orite, this idea of being equal and the equal rights, te pāharakeke, which I'll come back to, and taunga tuku iho, which is this gift of knowledge that is passed down. And the other 2 kind of props up te pāharakeke, which is this idea, if you imagine the harakeke or the flax bush, there's the little baby flax that's growing in the middle. If you kill that or pull that out, then the entire flax bush dies. So they're using it as this metaphor of our entire whānau family community is this flax bush. And our tauira, our akonga, our student, is that little flax in the middle. And so if you kind of pull that out, which is what a lot of modern schooling does. It's kind of like, actually, let's forget all of this family stuff. Let's put you in school. This is what you do now. And so in the Te Reo Māori side, in Te Ao Māori, what they really wanted to say is, no, we're going to envelop you. And then those gifts of knowledge can be passed on, which I found really beautiful, actually.
Yeah. What does it look like online? What's a tangible example of how they played that out?
Definitely. So what we found was for some, what they then did was from there, they said that there were these 4 they called it āhuatanga, which are like different sort of ways that you could think of those 3 themes. And it was time, space, interaction, and modality. Obviously they had Te Reo Māori names for it, but given that this is an English podcast. And so what they were looking at is very similar to what we're considering in English with the hybrid learning. It's this, that it doesn't matter whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. It doesn't matter where you are, and it doesn't matter how you interact, and it doesn't matter in different ways of interacting the modality. And so for them, for example, there was one beautiful example they had of they were teaching the kids algorithmic thinking under the digital technologies curriculum, but instead of doing it in some boring, really westernized version of that, they had I'm going to get your grandma to make help you teach you how to make fried bread. And then that you can do that at home. I just need you to film. So that's a different mode again. You've got the real life grandma and them because they were in lockdown. And then they were filming the making of the fried bread. And then the kid had to write out what the different algorithms were, like what was the order of how you make fried bread. And obviously you get it wrong, you don't repeat a stage and the fried bread doesn't work. And so for that, they then they brought in the aspects of learning into something that some of these kids may have already been doing in school.
Yeah, so real whānau context and really integrating it into the process of learning.
Totally, yeah. Did you have an example like that from English, Maggie?
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say with the English medium schools as well, the schools that stood out were really considering at least the whānau, but often the whole community. So like Wesley Primary, for example, they've got a clinic on site. Tamaki College, they managed to provide internet for the entire neighborhood. So they're strengthening that connection between the community and the school. They're putting the school, kind of, I guess, making school into a place that community members can go to for help. It becomes a trusted place instead of this mysterious place where you send your kid and you don't know what they're doing. And if you get a phone call, it's probably going to be bad.
Parents often feel closed out completely from secondary context.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, it was super cool to see the schools sort of working on really building that connection. Again, at Tamaki College, they have like, I forget the name of it, but it's basically this like tech cafe where the akonga are fixing tech problems for community members.
I think it actually is called Tech Cafe.
There we are. Just bringing the community into the school, including them. And when you asked earlier what had really stood out, a theme across the board, no matter how high or low tech on or offline the schools were, was just having the learning presented in a way where the whānau can see it and it's like understandable to them and they feel like they're keeping pace with what their kid is doing and they're really on board. So yeah, that could look like Ormiston Primary. Theirs was really low tech. It's literally just like a grid of paper with homework options for the week. But all of those homework options have been designed for the akonga to do with minimal support from their adults so that you don't get this loop of like the kid doesn't understand something, the parent doesn't understand something, the parent's trying to contact the school, the teacher has too many emails. It's just like, oh no, this is exactly what we're doing and you can see it and you can do it if you want to, or you can like trust your kid to do it because we've taught them the consistent skills. Do you know what I mean? I'm getting random.
I think one of the magic things that I've noticed as well is that the schools that are doing that stuff well aren't bound by their socioeconomic definitions either. Like, you know, you look at the Manaia Kalani schools and they're a fantastic example of never accepting that there's a good reason for not closing the digital divide, you know, and they've worked, I mean, there's no question, they've worked incredibly hard to come up with partnerships and you know, initiatives and programs. It's been a heck load of work and it's happened over many, many years. But my goodness, didn't it pay off over lockdown for those schools that had already invested in closing that digital divide? Like I worry, you know, one of my biggest sadnesses over the lockdowns is we didn't see that as an opportunity as a country to close the digital divide once and for all, because I still see school leaders and school communities decrying their socioeconomic status as a reason for not having every single student having access to that technology. Were all of your case studies schools that were one-to-one, or were there ones that weren't one-to-one devices, or did they tend to be one-to-one device schools?
Some of them, it depended on the age. I know Green Hive School we looked at, that's a primary school, so they were one-to-one for the 5s and 6s, but the younger akonga were sharing, and they were basically working on kind of building that agency and again getting the kids familiar with the different apps that they would use when they were younger and sharing devices, so as soon as they hit the age where they had one-to-one, they could just fly with it. And
I know Green Hive are one of the fabulous schools in our kahuiako here in Whanau.
Cool.
And I believe it was you that introduced us.
They had some fantastic.
And you know, and I know from working closely with Melissa there that learner agency has always been a real priority for them. What's your biggest takeaway around the learner agency piece?
Okay, again, I think just having a consistent setup, having something that looks the same. If you're a year 5 doing your maths, the way that you access that is going to be linked or look the same as the way that you might access your science or your English. So
school-wide protocols around how you access learning. I know that from having a child in a school where each teacher was left to come up with their own strategy. And you know, I know even as a senior secondary student, there was enough for one of them to sort of give up because you know they weren't 100% clear about how to access learning. I mean, we worked through it. Everyone worked through it. There was a learning journey.
Ironically, we've actually heard that anecdotally more from secondary school students. And often, I mean, I've heard of one which shall remain unnamed, where they had half the teachers were really into the Microsoft suite, so they were doing everything on Teams, and then the other half were really into Google, so it set their entire departments up. And so these kids were having to switch between the two.
And there's no such thing as a good or a bad platform. It's just like pick a platform.
Just pick one, stick with it.
I'm actually of two minds of that, because I come from technology and have been in technology for many years. And especially the last few years, barring this job, I was doing a lot of kind of contracting around many different roles. Yeah. And one of the things about being a technologist is having that ability to be able to switch. Yeah. And so given, and keeping in mind that sometimes these are 13 and 14-year-olds that are already dealing with a lot, having that ability is not the worst thing, but it's able to be being able to scaffold that into a way where they can actually access the learning, which is the point, not how to learn the platform.
For me, it's a bit of a both and. Like, I'm a huge believer in keeping it simple in terms of your learning architecture as a school, and students, their habits that you want them to form, and their routines, and they know how to access everything. What you use beyond that should be the best tool for the job. So it's absolutely fine to use Canva, Microsoft, whatever. Yeah. But you do need I'm a firm believer that those base level routines being school-wide is hugely helpful.
And I think just teaching the skills to learn to navigate those new platforms, like as soon as Viv started making her last point, I was like, you are totally right. You need to be able to adapt. You need to be able to learn. But I think some of the schools, the Manaya Kalani schools in particular, they really put time aside to support the teachers to learn to use the system so that they can confidently guide the students through it. That makes a big difference.
I remember being, because I was had the unfortunate or fortunate, depending on how you think of it, being a part of the first cohort ever having to lock down in New Zealand, because I flew back in from Italy at the same time as patient 0 in New Zealand. Right. Wasn't me. Even though I was a woman, wasn't me.
I think we all landed about the same time. We were all overseas,
But in those 2 weeks, I remember us being at home, and I was really lucky because I went, oh my goodness, this thing is coming and we need to make a plan. And so we did that as a school really proactively, and we're already a school that used devices pretty darn effectively. But one of the best things we ever did is we had an explicit lesson on using Google Calendar and coming into doing Google Chat and a couple of protocols. And it was really nutsy boltsy. But the fact that we knew we had taught everyone how to use their Google Calendar and how to use Google Chat, because you could get by without using those 2 things in class face-to-face. Paid off in spades. It was really interesting. Now,
Sorry, just very quickly, another shout out to you, Claire. Right in those very early days, I remember sharing your it was like a letter or and it was to the parents and the kids, I believe. But it really set that agency at a level that I hadn't seen before. So we were really impressed, which is why we shared it and included it in one of our earlier pieces during that first lockdown. And that was the whole point, was that it really showed that agency in a way that these sort of, there are all these like digital device like contracts that they make every kid sign. They don't really read them. They don't understand them. But, having it in plain English, that really gives the kids the agency to say, oh, this is what I'm actually agreeing to, and this is how it impacts my learning. Much like I mentioned the phone ban, it's this kind of thing, right? It's taking that agency away instead of teaching our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just saying, I'm mindful that this is one of 3 pieces of work that you've been doing. So one of the things that I've had a little bit of a look into is your leaders strand. And you've created a self-directed course for school leaders in the space. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So we decided with that one, because leaders are so busy, we weren't going to try and do a whole bunch of like real life workshops. We have done a few just to test it. In fact, I think at your school, Claire, we just to see if some of the stuff landed. And a lot of the stuff that we got, we've taken from best practices globally. So especially UNICEF has done a lot of futures-led thinking and education. Is it UNICEF? It is, it was uni someone. And what
UNESCO?
We did was UNESCO. That's it, not UNICEF.
I know about that part.
Thank you.
So UNICEF do great work, though. It has to be said.
Can we edit that out? So it is great work. It's amazing. So what we did was we put it together into a futures-led course that really wants to take it, just like Maggie said, let's actually forget that the reasons why we may have done this in the past. What we want to do is be Tamaki College now, but 10 years from now, right? We need to think about how it is, or your school, in fact, Claire, where it's about how do we take that space and the synchronicity out of learning? Because that was the saddest part of all of this, is that when we first went into schools, we could have talked to any number of private schools or high decile schools and talked to them, and they would have been like, oh yeah, we've had little Jimmy off at the Youth Olympics every year for the past 2 years, and their learning hasn't been interrupted. You know, and all of this kind of stuff. Whereas there were other schools where it was just like, no, we can't do this. We don't have devices. We don't have internet. And so one of the really amazing things for us was being able to find those examples like Wesley Primary, where they were like, actually, we can do things with what we need to do. And in fact, I think one of our kura, the teacher drove around with us, legally or not. I think legally. I mean, they kind of threw the thing at the kid, you know, like dropped it on the
drive-by homework drop.
Yeah. They kept their 2 meters. And so, and it was as simple as that, right? They realized that the packs being given by the ministry weren't quite enough to keep their youngest kids going. So they made new packs of their own and they dropped them off. And that was obviously a small enough school to be able to do that. But it's this case of that. And I don't know if Maggie, you wanted to give a really quick little shout out to your previous role at Te Kura, because it really talks to all of this very well. Yeah.
So completely unrelatedly to these projects, until recently I've been working at Te Kura, or Tahoe Te Kura Pounamu, the correspondence school. And so I was in a role called Kaiawhina, which was a new role just created as a pandemic response, but then carried on because they could really see the impact that it was making. And we are purely well-being support. We do not deliver anything academic. It is like, just connecting with the akonga, helping them set goals, helping them be agentic and manage their learning and take on reasonable amounts and push themselves. But first and foremost, it's about connecting with them and making sure that they know that just because they may not see their peers face to face doesn't mean that no one's paying attention to them and that we're not here for them. And you can see in the case studies, I was based in Christchurch, so completely different cohort of akonga, but you can see in the case studies, the akonga in Tamaki Makaurau talking about the support that they feel from Kaiawhina and the difference that just having a well-being kind of dedicated space can make for them. And several of them commented about the lack of that at their face-to-face schools. Like, yeah.
But I mean, Te Kura's been doing this for so long that in the podcast, which was the third section of our project, which is aimed at parents and whānau, we actually had a mother who had been at Te Kura 22 years ago and had this personal support to be able to do her, at the time, school C exams at home with the baby in tow. That baby is now an adult living in Australia. So this is how long ago it was. And it's this like, why do we keep, this is the bit that gets me so angry, is why do we keep losing these lessons that we learn and throwing them out when we think we don't need them anymore, when a lesson that we learned 20 something years ago, this just, you know, the radical idea of caring for our kids is the thing that's like caused that woman to be the success that I know she is now.
And I know for many of us, particularly who have been in this futures thinking space for so long, there was part of us that got quite, not perversely so, but excited that during the lockdowns and COVID, they were like, this is it. This is the disruption that's going to change how we deliver in teaching learning. And nearly universally, we're the same group of people going, what the heck? We've doubled down. And it feels like, for the most part, we've returned to practices of the past. And in some cases, it feels like we're actually doubling down on practices in the past that really no longer serve us. So in terms of the high level overstructure of the leadership PD, what's that high level? How's it structured? How many sessions is it? What are the main themes of the that course?
That is a good question.
I'm not sure how many lessons it is. It's web-based, so you can kind of click through it at your own pace. There's a lot of videos. It's really multimodal, Viv. Like, you've got things to discuss with your team or to consider by yourself. You've got things to watch, things to listen to, things to read. But overall, it is unpacking learner agency and well-being and learning architecture, as well as just like how people can implement that at their own school, like considering you don't have to do exactly what the sample schools are doing. Like, what are your strengths? What's important to your community? I don't know. Do you want to add to that?
Context bound,
yeah, this kind of, so I'm just bringing it up while you were talking. So after the introduction, there's kind of this introduction to hybrid and what it is and what you're even talking about. And then we delved into our case studies and we deep dived into what we call the well, I don't think we called it, I think we got this from someone, is the 5 hybrid levers for change. And so they were visionary principles, learner agency principles, curriculum principles, technology principles, and well-being principles. So they don't match with our 3 that we found, but they were like kind of
there's strong overlap.
Yeah. And within each of those there are, you know, deep learning, and there's like things that you can read in little videos and stuff, and so that was this idea that you don't have to kind of sit there and go, oh, this is going to take me 2 hours, I'm going to go through it. It could be that you go, actually my school does really well with this technology thing already, like yours, but what I might need a little bit more help on is that idea of like, how do I link that curriculum in a specific way, or whatever it might be. So you can skip in and out of bits if you wanted to.
And middle leaders can access this. They'll be able to access, won't
anyone can access it completely for free. So the ministry's funded the entire project, so we don't have to charge anyone to access this. And if you just go to omgtech.co.nz/future-of-learning, which we'll put into the show notes. Down in the show notes. You'll be able to click through and find it, or also anywhere on, I think all the way littered through it should be contact details for people as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
And we're hoping that people will see that this, I guess the concept of hybrid learning, like Viv said, it's not just like a temporary pandemic response thing that you drop. It's something that can make learning not just more flexible if there's a crisis, but just more personalized, more kind of allowing individual akong to gain confidence and explore their strengths and bring their whānau into what they're doing. And it can really be implemented anywhere, regardless of the technology that you have. Like there were so many good examples of actually very low tech, but still quite agency inspiring practices, or still quite akong-centered practices.
Yeah, and I've been reflecting more and more. We're on a real mātauranga Māori journey at Albany Senior High School, and I look back to the things that I really value around technology and the things around learner agency and how we can use it to reinforce relationships, and how we can use it to do collaborative learning. And actually there's a real lineup in terms of many of the principles that sort of underpin mātauranga Māori and what effective use of technology looks like. It's really interesting that I think they dovetail really nicely, and they can actually, technology can be a real amplifier for our mātauranga Māori journey.
100%. I mean, we figured that out like when the digital technologies curriculum was new in 2018, and then we looked at the Hangara Matahiko, which is the Māori language version, and it's just a much, I want to say, like a nicer curriculum. It really starts as being student-centered as opposed to the English version, which was like, what's computational thinking? What's algorithmic thinking? You know, whereas in the other one, it's like, who are you and why are you making technology? Are you making technology, and who are you making it for? You know, it starts off with that. Whereas in the English medium, that doesn't come in until like progress outcome 2.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting if you flip it that way. It really makes it much more human, and it does remind you that is really the reason why a lot of the stuff happens, is because we are humans and we need to make it work for us, not the other way around.
And the sort of traditional like British-based education system is not necessarily built for humans. So I think any move that we're making away from like attendance, classroom, line up, you know what I mean? It's all positive.
There's a few people we might want to remind that very thing. But we won't go into that. Finally, the piece that you've done for parents. So there are videos that we'll be able to use to upskill.
Yeah, 100%. Show them to your parents. There's 6 videos. So 5 of them were filmed along various themes. And then the 6th one was when we brought in a few of the others to kind of have a little chat about over the overarching project itself. And that one was filmed live. And it was really, really interesting to be part of this. And really, I think the biggest learning we had from that was that the parents that we picked, even though they were ones of supposedly from schools where the kids were already doing this kind of stuff, they were very much stuck in that, oh, we only did that for the pandemic. I wouldn't go back to that. So if there was a learning I would have from that is I possibly would have really targeted very specifically the questions to kind of push past that, but we at the time we didn't. And so when we went back and reflected on it, that is what we found. But then we also kind of thought, well, that is really a reality of what this whole project is about, right? You'll have teachers, you'll have some leaders that are like well ahead and some that are wanting to be well ahead. And that's what all of this mahi is for. But we really have to bring our parents and whānau along. And if you're talking to parents and whānau that know that's exactly what we're talking about, but they're still like, oh, but it's really good because we don't have to do that anymore. It's, you know, we need to make sure they're included.
Yeah, I'm always really interested when I hear principals or school leaders talk about community consultation and saying what they can't do because the community doesn't want it. And I flip that around. I think we've got a real responsibility as school leaders to educate our community as to why we want to do what we want to do, and to encourage them to give us some space to trial it and then talk about it, because they only know what they know. Sometimes you get parents who are in really innovative workspaces and they do that leap. They can make the leap where they go, oh, my workplace has changed. I can see why school needs to change. Even some that are in those innovative, flexible working spaces still call on their own school experience. And if they were successful in a very traditional context, they can struggle with anything that feels less than traditional and structured in the way that they knew school to be. And also the past is rosy always. And well, if you loved school. Often your best advocates are your parents who hated school, because at least they understand that, well, we're trying to do stuff differently to try and engage. Okay, mine's the time. You've each got about 20 seconds to give me your final pitch. Why are we going to come and jump onto these platforms? Vivian, go.
Oh no, I'm gonna be put on the spot. Just that the future is already here, as cheesy as that sounds. And you're gonna get left behind. Every day I see people that are getting left behind because they don't understand, not because they don't have access, because they don't understand. And this will be the first step for your teachers, your school leaders, heck, even your board of trustees, if you can get them on it, to really be able to take your entire school community on this journey. To help them understand that the future is already here and we got to just catch up.
I love that saying, it's our job to know better and then do better. Part of that journey. Maggie, what about you, as someone who was involved in the writing of these beautiful pieces of work? What's your takeaway?
I would second that, and I would add that my hope is that people who see this, whether they are parents or school leaders, will see that technology doesn't have to be scary, change does not have to be scary, and that if a school makes an effort to invite the community in and to get their input, they will see beautiful outcomes from that. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So once again, I want to thank you, Vivian, and thank you, Maggie, for joining me here today. I also want to thank anyone who has hung on until the end of this podcast. Thank you for sticking with us. As always, please drop a line if there's anyone else you'd like us to talk to, or if you indeed would like to be part of the conversation here at DisruptEDTV. Until the next episode, ka kite.
Ka kite.
Ka kite.